Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and this is, oh my goodness, it's the end of January. It's January 31st. Tomorrow is going to be a new month, huh? So this is Theater Resources Unlimited. And if you're sort of stumbling upon us and you don't know who we are and you just happen to find us, we're an arts service organization that I founded like around 1992. It's been like 32 or 33 three, I don't know, it's about 32 years. It was established originally because I wanted to find ways of networking with theater friends and with producers, and turned into something that I wasn't expecting. We became an organization that nurtured and supported the development of producers. Producers includes self-producing artists, for those of you who don't know that term. Self-producing artists are artists like actors and directors and writers who sit around and sit around and sit around and wait to be produced and finally say, doggone it, I'm going to do it myself. And they make things happen. We call it SPA, because it's so relaxing producing yourself. Uh, don't believe it for a second. No, it's hard work. Um, so we started doing these community gatherings in 2020, just to get people together in a room because we were all isolated. Everybody remembers that, right? Um, God, I can't believe we went through that, but we went through that. And it's sort of become its own thing here. This is the 246th or 47th consecutive community gathering I'm doing since April 17th, 2020. Um, a couple things happened. First of all, we were a local New York arts organization, and I had like ambitious friends who kept saying, you ought to do things virtually because then you'll become global. And I would say, ridiculous. We're not going to be global. We're just a local, small little New York arts organization. But then COVID came around and said, go virtual or go home. So we basically started this, and all of a sudden I have people coming in from Australia, UK, um, Singapore, all around the country, Canada. We're no longer just a local organization. We now service people everywhere and anywhere. Anybody who wants to learn about the business and wants to learn about producing, we're here for you. Um, so our conversations have touched on a multitude of topics over the past 4.5 years. Yeah, oh, almost 5 years. Wow. Um, One of the things that I learned from COVID and from going global is that theater happens outside of New York. Really? So I've come over the past 5 years. I've made it a point to bring in as many theater companies outside of New York to talk about theater that doesn't have to happen in New York and certainly doesn't have to be Broadway. I'm incredibly lucky that I know someone who knows someone at the Guthrie. The Guthrie is like one of the basic like landmark regional theaters in our country. It's an institution, um, and I'm told I belong in an institution, but that's a different story. So we are very lucky to have two people joining us today who are well, they're in leadership positions at the Guthrie. One of the things we're going to talk about is how do you run such a big organization? There's a lot going on there. So I'm going to bring them on. First of all, I want you to meet the senior producing director. Did I have that term right?
Senior artistic producer.
A senior artistic producer. Oh,
Fine.
so pardon the word salad tossed in my brain.
Yeah.
So um, so we've got Tracy Brigden, who's the senior artistic producer. I'm going to bring her in right now, and we have Carla Steen, who is the resident dramaturg. So we're going to be able to talk about goings on, the workings of the theater, but we're also going to be able to talk a little bit about dramaturgy and about plays and about well, we'll see where the conversation leads us. It's probably going to be in directions I'm not even expecting. So here's Carla, and here's Tracy, and here's me. So
Mhm.
how do you want to start this? Why don't we talk about you as, individually first before we bring in the Guthrie? Tell us about your past, your history in theater, and what led you finally to the Guthrie. Carla, we'll
Sure,
start with you.
I'll
Tracy, we'll
start.
start with you.
Let me first say it's really interesting that there's so many playwrights in the room. And as a producer who's also a writer, it was very gratifying to see how many people are doing both things. I like that our world is a little more hybrid now, so we can do more than one thing. I'm also a director. Um, I was lucky enough. I'm a native New Yorker, so I grew up going to New York theater, and I got my degree in directing from Northwestern, and then moved right back to New York City. And lucky me, I got my first job out of college at the Manhattan Theater Club, assisting Lynn Meadow first, and then eventually working my way up in the artistic team there. And so I really got a great lesson in how new plays get made by the likes of, Arthur Miller and Athol Fugard and John Shanley and Terrence McNally and you name it, the sort of heyday of that theater. I mean, although they're having a new heyday now, I would say. And from my various jobs at Manhattan Theater Club, I moved on to Hartford Stage, where I was associate artistic director, and then eventually became artistic director of a theater in Pittsburgh called City Theater, where I was artistic director for many years. And at City Theater, we only produced new plays. We only produced plays that were 5 years old or younger, and did a lot of commissioning. I developed a whole new play program, a new play festival, and then left in time to go get my MFA in screenwriting and playwriting, because I had spent so many years helping other people write their plays. I thought perhaps now I have something to say myself. Moved back to the East Coast with my family, to Fairfield, Connecticut, 2 seconds from the Metro North, in time to have a year and a half of plays lined up to direct, and my writing in between, just in time for COVID.
I
And
just want to say that I was just in Fairfield 2 nights ago.
were
I was at
you
I was at Fairfield. Is it university or college? I was at the Quick.
university? Yeah, yeah. It's a
They were
nice school.
doing a screening of Sing Sing, the movie
Ah,
that Coleman Domingo has an
yes.
Oscar nomination for. But the person who the whole story was based on is a true member and a dear
Oh,
friend of
really?
ours. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so
Oh,
it was
that's
really
great.
exciting.
That's cool. So yeah, and then a couple years of COVID and all the directing work that I had assiduously set up for my relaunch of my freelance career, all evaporated. And then at the same time, this job came up at the Guthrie. And as you mentioned, I mean, the Guthrie Theater is one of the great regional theaters, one of the kind of tent poles of the whole regional theater movement, and a job to be, basically artistically at, a leadership position here, and also get to direct and move to a great city like the Twin Cities with, as you say, it has an extraordinary theater community, much more than I ever realized. It was just too good an adventure and an opportunity. And so my little foray into going back to freelance, I was sucked back into institutional theater. And here I am. And I'm about to start rehearsal for The Mousetrap here at the Guthrie in a couple weeks.
Oh
So
dear, you're doing the mousetrap.
we are.
Oh,
We're
my
doing a very
goodness.
luxe production of The Mousetrap.
We're going to talk about the Guthrie a little more. I'm going to actually bring Carla on now. Carla, tell us a little bit about your background. Um,
Sure, mine's a
I mean,
little less
I already have about 17 questions I'm planning on asking the two of you.
mine's a little less colorful in part because I've been here for t almost 27 years. So a good portion of the great portion of my professional career has been spent here in dramaturgy and in communications to a degree. And I am a native Minnesotan, and I came down to the Twin Cities to go to college. I studied English and history. An actor friend said I should be a dramaturg, and I said, "What's a dramaturg?" And that sounded like exactly what I should be doing. So I got an MFA in dramaturgy from Columbia in New York and promptly moved back here because I am truly a Midwesterner. And started really as an intern and have stayed on. So pretty straightforward for me.
Okay. All
One
right.
directional.
Let me bring back. Uh, let's see. Where's the spotlight? There it is. Okay. Um, so Tracy and Carla, we're going to talk a little bit about the Guthrie now. Let me add myself here. Um, well, first of all, let me talk about a little bit about just the history, so everybody has it. Whoever doesn't know it, um, Tyrone Guthrie. Does anybody do either of you want to talk about Tyrone Guthrie for a second and who he was and
Carla's good at
how
that. Carla's the historian.
okay, good. You go
Kind
for
of my
that. Yeah.
specialty here.
Okay. Yeah, talk about Tyrone for a second. People who I can't believe anybody in this room wouldn't know who he is, but go for it.
She's an Anglo-Irishman who got into radio drama in the 1920s, moved into theater in the 1930s, eventually moved into opera as well. And by the 1950s, had led a couple of organizations in Britain and then was invited by the founders of the Stratford Festival in Ontario to be their first artistic director. And among the things that he was very well known for was taking classic plays and breathing new life into them and finding out why you do a classic play now. He stayed at Stratford Festival for 3 years and then left and went his way into commercial theater in New York. And by 1959 was soured on commercial theater in New York, started to talk with a couple of colleagues and decided that maybe they needed to think of a new way of doing theater in the United States. And it's from that brainstorm session and a couple of other years that the idea of the Guthrie and then eventually the Guthrie itself here was formed.
Well, I'm going to ask you something. You may or may not be able to clear this up for me. I'm aware of regional theaters in this country that have been around longer than the Guthrie. Like the one that comes to mind is in Abington, Virginia, the Barter Theater. The Barter Theater often claims some sort of precedence as being one of the first. There was something different about what Guthrie wanted to do, I think. Can we talk a little bit? Excuse me. Talk a little bit. I can't talk a little bit because I got something in my throat. But can we talk a little bit about what it was that Guthrie was trying to achieve when he created this, and how it really affected regional theaters and the development of regional theaters all around the country? Carla, can you take on a little bit of that?
Yeah, he wanted to get away from the business pressure of commercial theater, the need to first sell tickets above all things, and to take the time to develop a show, to give actors the opportunity to train with other actors and to have a variety of opportunities to perform in a variety of kind of plays. So he was finding actors might get a great gig in New York, but then it was for an extended run. They're in a play for a year, a couple of years, and they're sort of stuck, as opposed to being able to work on a variety of kinds of shows and really develop their craft. And so part of what he wanted to do was to give actors a lot of stylistic diversity, and then to also bring in young actors to be able to train with the older actors and on a variety of different plays. So that was part of it. So to be able to do a repertory company.
That's what I wanted to ask. I wanted you to put a name to it, because today there are very few, if any, repertory companies. Is the Guthrie still considered a repertory company? I don't think so.
We don't do rotating rep like that
Yeah,
anymore. No.
it's like Shaw Festival and Stratford Festival. We don't have anything. We had the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, although I'm not sure where that is right now.
Yeah,
I
they still
think
have
it
a
had a
company.
problem.
Yeah, yeah. They
And
have
the Alley Theater has a company.
yeah.
Which one?
The Alley Theater in Houston has an acting company, a
They
core
they do have
acting
an
company.
Yeah, because to me it just seems like such a great model, the repertory. model. I love it from going to the Shaw Festival for years and years and years. Um, so tell me if you can, either of you, because now that you're there, Tracy, you're working, you're part of the company, you're part of a very large company. I want to define a couple terms in a little while, but first I want to ask you, do you think that there's anything that is unique in terms of the Guthrie versus other theater companies? Is there anything that you do that is really a Guthrie thing?
Hmm. It's an interesting question. I mean, it's definitely it's not necessarily the highest budget company, but it's close. I think Manhattan Theater Club's budget at this point is higher than the Guthrie's, but it's definitely the largest regional theater I've worked at. I mean, Hartford Stage is considered a fairly large regional theater, but I think that the Hartford Stage budget is less than half of the Guthrie's. And the amount of sort of output as well as humans in the building is by far larger than any company I've worked at. We have what, Carla, like 250 full-time employees, basically,
Maybe something like that.
plus,
I call
yeah,
that big.
yeah. And the budget ranges from, around 29 million to around $33 million, depending on the year. And we're doing, 8, 9, 10 productions, sometimes more, plus a whole panoply of education programs, community outreach programs, professional training programs. There's a lot going on here all the time. And I think part of it is, the building itself is a public building. People come here to take their prom pictures. And so there is, I think, more of a feeling here that we are here to really serve the community in myriad ways. That it goes beyond just the plays. It's it is, and also as kind of the great matriarch of this large community. People tout different numbers of theater companies that exist in the Twin Cities. I think if you look kind of to the region, at any given time, there's between 60 and 80 other theater companies in the area, which is amazing. And in a way, the Guthrie is sort of the parent of them all in one way or another. And there is a responsibility to that as well in terms of keeping the ecosystem going. Because the work that we are able to give actors and other artists helps sustain that community. So I guess I'm trying to say that there is a true community here, and I think there's a more of a place at the Guthrie that is a steward of that community in a different way than I've experienced in other places. I mean, Manhattan Theater Club, for instance, is an extraordinary theater, and if it closed its doors tomorrow, it would be a shame, but New York would sniff and pick up and keep going. Whereas the Guthrie shut its doors, it would be an extraordinary blow to this community. I don't know,
Well,
Carla, what do you think? Anything else?
No, I just did all that. Yep.
okay, you did. Okay, ditto, ditto. So let me ask you this. What part of that large organization, that large institution, does the senior artistic producer work in?
Really all parts. I mean, this is something that's different in terms of my job on staff from other theaters. I mean, every staff I've been on, there's a sort of senior management team of some kind. But because there's so much to manage, from the actual building to the culture, to the programs, to the staff, the work that the senior team, which is sort of senior members of all the different facets of the organization, do is a much bigger lift than other theaters I've worked at. My actual direct responsibility is to the artistic team. So I'm overseeing the education programs, the professional training programs, the community engagement programs, and technically the rest of the artistic staff. We all are working on programming all the time, script development, line producing, each of the shows that comes through the door, casting, all the things. And our artistic team all together with all those departments is about 11 people. I think in the pre-pandemic times, it was much bigger. But right now we're at about 11.
It
And
sounds so big already.
yeah, exactly. I mean, we're small at 11 for the artistic
Yeah,
team.
really. Couple like a whole ream of questions here. First of all, um, what are you involved in the selection of the season of the shows for the season?
Yes, we are. Very much so. As a matter of fact,
Okay.
we're hot and heavy in it right now.
So let me ask you something else. What is a Guthrie production? And what are the things that you would say, oh no, I don't think that's for us? And what are the things where you go, yes, it's exactly what we need to do?
I'll let Carla start. Carla's title is resident dramaturg, but for all intents and purposes, she's also the literary manager. A lot of theaters would use that title for her as well.
Um, a good portion of just a one element that we need to take into consideration is that both of our main theaters are large spaces. Our thrust stage seats 1,100 and our proscenium stage seats 700. So there's usually a play has to have a certain size, which does not necessarily mean large cast size, but the story size needs to be able to fill those spaces. So that's just like one element. We usually do a mix in our programming of classic and new work and what might be termed revivals, somewhere in between. So that's just another factor that goes into it, that we're not going to be doing 8 new plays and we're not going to be doing 8 classic plays. It's going to be, so there's not exactly slots, but they're puzzle pieces that have to work together. And
well, let me ask you this. Do you start making decisions based on audience responses? Do you start to see what your community is interested in, or does that not matter as much as the having a certain artistic integrity about just believing in a piece and wanting to see it up on stage, on your stage?
I wouldn't describe it as a binary that way. I think everything is fodder for decision making. So we start with plays that we like and plays that we think actually resonate with our community. So as has been said, we are a regional theater and we're doing theater for the Minneapolis, Twin Cities, Minnesota, Upper Midwest theater community. So we do take that into consideration. Community is one of our core values.
Well, let me make it even tougher. Tyrone Guthrie created what he created because he didn't want to be driven by the need to sell tickets. To some degree, we all have to be driven by the need to sell tickets. So, does that go into the decision making?
I would argue that
Course.
the whole regional theater community used to be much less driven by those issues, and certainly post-pandemic, we're all much more driven by having to have some things to pay for other things. I think the Guthrie does pretty well in terms of the percentage of ticket sale, of our budget being from ticket sales compared to other theaters, because we do have these enormous spaces and they are fairly well subscribed and filled. But it's not like we're not programming a whole season of every play. We know we're going to make a boatload of money, but we have to make sure there's at least a couple in the season that we know are going to do really well in that big house and pay for the things that might not sell out as easily.
Remember that ostensibly we're a producers organization, so we all feel for you. We all get it. We all know. I mean, I've got a room full of people. We're all frustrated because we just don't know how to keep theater alive in New York. It's so expensive.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, and it's not like there isn't value to doing Midsummer Night's Dream, which we're going to the dress rehearsal of tonight. That's a play that will sell, and we can sell student matinees of it. But it's also a great play. Mousetrap.
Yeah,
Nobody's done
it. It'll stick around.
Yeah, it'll stick around. I mean, Mousetrap, you wouldn't put necessarily in the canon of the most important plays ever in the history of the world, but there's a reason it's been running on the West End for 75 years. It's a very well-made play, and Agatha Christie's a female playwright who's never been on our stage before. So
Oh,
I
there's your
think there's great
story.
value there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we all have to think in terms of the story. A lot of us, anyone in theater, when we set out to do a production, we have to find out what is newsworthy about it. So yeah, that is a great story. Um,
Mhm.
so, so do you have anything else, Carla, that you want to add to that in terms of the artistic versus the business aspects of decision making?
I mean, I guess
I guess
too,
you don't really want to, do
well,
you?
no, I just, in terms of, I've been here long enough to sort of see some of the, the trends, I suppose. And in terms of how we respond to our audience, we know that our audience likes musicals, and so we've programmed musicals more regularly, probably since we moved into this building than before this building. We know that our audience loves adaptations of beloved stories, novels. So, like you saw Pride and Prejudice, we know that will go over. So we we consider those as strong possibilities
Just so you
for
know, it was because
things.
of Pride and Prejudice at the Guthrie that we decided to go to the Fringe Festival. So
Mhm.
you
There
you
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 go.
you led our decision making. We didn't know that what we were going to find when we got there, and we were just amazed.
And we also talk about that, we're the Metropolitan Museum of the theater. So, we're gonna give something for everybody in certain ways. We're gonna have the Impressionists and the modern art and the, wacky sculpture you can't figure out and the, Rodin. I mean, we're gonna have everything, because
You don't
we're
you you don't have
representing.
you don't have the banana taped to the wall though. You don't
Yeah,
have
right.
that.
No, that's more that there's other theaters in town that do the banana tape to the wall.
Okay. Um, You said something earlier. I noticed it in passing. You talked about the development of new works. In what ways? What are the programs that you have? What are the opportunities for writers to have their works developed through you? And what do you mean by developed? You probably mean what we mean, but just
Mhm.
I just want you to say it.
Yeah, I mean, we would like to, and I think there, hopefully on the horizon, there is more of a structured plan of like a new play development program. Right now, it's a little bit more per production. So we don't have an every year new play festival, or we don't have we absolutely commission 3 plays a year and then we have 3 readings and 4 workshops. We don't have that as a structured program, but we do commission plays and we do develop them by, yes, and our native, yes, you should definitely talk about the Native Advisory Council. And we do have, regular times that we're interested in a play and we'll do a reading of it to hear it out loud and be with the playwright and talk about it. Or we're going to produce a play and we do a several day workshop of it for the playwright to work on it. Or I'll let Carla talk about, even there's a level of development that can go on with classic plays, like we did when we put the history plays in rep last year. There was development workshop of the history plays. And so right now there's not a formal program, but we do commission, we do workshops, and we do produce new plays.
Is there any need for us to talk about the various meanings of dramaturgy and the idea that dramaturgy isn't just developing the play itself, but also exploring and researching the time and place and the specifics of what you're doing, or do you get involved in that much, Carla? Do you write the program notes?
Yep, that's pretty much everything I do. Yeah, the way I describe dramaturgy is that I am a text and a context person. So I'm involved in,
Like that?
yeah, so just figuring out what the story is that's being told, if it's a text that is in development, if I'm in the workshop and giving notes and understanding what the playwright is trying to say, just what is that story and how is the text gelling or not. And then context comes into play much more often with established plays. So if we're doing, a Nakarima Society, which is the next play up that I'm dramaturging, what is where does this fall in Pearl Clegg's canon? Why did she write it? What was she saying? And what do I need to know about the period that it's written in and the context of it's a story that takes place in 1964 that harkens back to 1955, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, context can mean a lot of different things, and I'm involved in a lot of that. Context is also talking to people about the play. So I've done a lot of talking about Midsummer Night's Dream in the last 2-3 days or so.
Let me
So
ask
yeah,
you something.
that's
RK Gruen is chomping at the bit. He's waiting for me to ask the question about your indigenous population in Minnesota. But we will get to that. Um, have can you talk about your experience as a dramaturg, talking to writers and how you can inspire them to make their plays better uh, without making them cry?
I think the biggest lesson I learned very early on is that a question is much more useful than a comment. And there is no a comment suggests that there is a right fix, that there is an answer to a problem. A question asks what the intention is, what the goal is, and may inspire a different response altogether than just a comment would. So I think asking questions is always just the best thing. What those questions are varies significantly from playwright to playwright, work to work. But usually it's I think most commonly it's a question about clarity and intention. And just, is this what you are trying to say? And this is what I'm getting. Is this what you meant to say?
Right.
And the same thing comes into play even if we're working on a Shakespeare or another work. It's just I spend a lot of time in rehearsal and table work listening to the ideas that are being batted around the room, collecting those, and then sometimes just echoing them back 4 weeks later to say, no, I understood that this was a key idea that you were trying to bring out. Is this still true or has this shifted? And then, just trying to help hone the ideas at play and the clarity of the way that the ideas are expressed in the story.
Have you ever had the experience of, I mean, I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes, of working with a playwright on a play that you thought it was having a little bit of trouble, and you brought them to the aha moment, and suddenly the play came into focus, and you went, "Wow!" You may not have said it to the writer, but you thought, "Wow, I helped with that."
Yeah, I suppose I don't know that I always keep track of that sort of thing. There are definitely things where, I've given a note and it's like, yeah, okay, it's opened something up. I think that's true of probably everybody that's given notes at any point along the process, where it's just another point of view, another lens to sort of see if it's a problem, to see the problem from, and another response outside of the writer to gauge how things are landing.
Well, I have to be honest with you. I've had experience. I've done a little bit of dramaturgy here and there. I've had experience of having a conversation with somebody, and I never tell them what to do, but I tell them what the things are that I find confusing and what I think might be problematic. And they go off and they come back and they say, "Look, I did exactly what you asked me to do." And I go, I don't say it, but I go, "No, you didn't." I mean, you ever had that experience?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
our
like,
prerogative.
I mean,
of
yeah,
course it
Yeah.
is. It's like, how did they get there from what I said? It's like sometimes I'm just bewildered.
Yeah. I would say some of the more like meaningful interactions I've had with writers are like, for example, Sharon Washington, who did her beautiful one-woman show, Feeding the Dragon. You might have gotten to see it when it was, I think it was at the Minetta Lane primary stages did it. We did the world premiere because I knew her as an actress, and she sent me 5 pages and said, I think I have a story I want to tell, but I don't think I'm really a playwright. And all I really had to say to her was, yes, you are a playwright. This is a play. This is definitely a play. Finish it and I'll put it on. And that was the door opening for her, for somebody that she considered somebody who would know, to say, yes, you are a playwright.
Okay, well, let's go to RK finally because he says as a board member of Theater Forward. For those of you who don't know, Theater Forward is um, a company that um, represented a number of regional theaters and supported a number of regional theaters that were members of Theater Forward. RK will probably untangle that later, but we supported Guthrie's outreach to the regional indigenous population. Has that initiative been sustained? And in general, can we also talk about how DEI and A have come into your awareness as a theater company and what's happening now, and how you feel about what's going on right now? So we're just going to switch it to DEI and D. I was had the A. I think accessibility is extremely important.
We have a Native Advisory Council that's made up of mostly theater artists and artists from the Native community in the area, and they serve in myriad ways. Most sort of actively, for instance, 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago, we did for the people a commission from the Guthrie that by Larissa Fasthorse and Ty Defoe. And Carla, you could talk more about what they did before we even had the play finished. But then once we had the play that was going into production, the Native Advisory Council met regularly with us and the staff to really indigenize the process of putting that play on, which ranged from, for instance, the first day of rehearsal, Joe Hodge, the executive artistic director, wasn't the first person to speak in that first day of rehearsal. Elders from the community were the first people to speak, and we saged the room. That was just a small thing that made a big difference to that community of that play. All the way to, front of house, we have a late seating policy like most theaters do. And in the Native community, the culture is different. And so there was no such thing as late seating. People could come in and out all they wanted, and children could be seated on laps, which is something we don't normally do. So there was a process that they helped advise us to make the experience of attending that play as accessible in all different kinds of ways, financially and just culturally, to the Native community in the area as possible. And it was very effective because we really had a great turnout and a lot of praise for that work that opened our doors to that community as wide as they could be open. But even before we got to the production, the council was very helpful with the development of the play.
So that's still active. You're still doing that work.
Yeah, they meet monthly.
Okay. And whatever pushback we're getting to DEI, it's not going to necessarily affect you and what you're doing.
Not at all.
Okay.
DEIA is one of our 4 core values,
Okay.
as Joe Hodge, our artistic director, has defined them. So it's right up there with fiscal responsibility, artistic excellence, and community. So
Oh, good old fiscal responsibility. Um, so, Owen, are there other questions that I haven't looked at? I have another question myself, but I want to take a question from the room.
Sure, we have a question from Susan Crawford. New plays. Do you only produce them if they have had no previous productions, for example, a previous short-term festival production?
Okay, this is all about something that we're aware of in New York, and I don't know if you're aware of it there, but there's something we call premieritis. There has been a tendency over the past 10 years or longer for theater companies to be resistant to doing works unless they were going to be able to tout it as their world premiere. I know the National New Play Network has been trying to counter those that inflexibility. Um, I'm also, by the way, you don't know this. I'm a playwright, composer, lyricist, so I'm very aware and very sensitive to these subjects as well. It it is hard to get a regional theater to take notice of an unknown writer to begin with. But we've also run against the problem of people saying, "I'm not interested in your play. You had a production of it in Poughkeepsie."
And it's funny that you say that because that's not my experience of New York at all in terms of the bigger theaters. Like when I worked at Manhattan Theater Club, yes, MTC did premieres, but most of the premieres were from the very sort of highest level writers. Whereas if it was a slightly lesser known writer, there was a desire to have the kinks worked out regionally, the equivalent of tryout in New Haven, right? And I think that still holds true. You look at something like Cult of Love or Eureka Day, both of them had previous regional productions. I think Bob asked the question about Sally and Tom. Sally and Tom went to the public theater, but only after it got really worked on at the Guthrie Theater. So I don't know that I see that as a New York thing at the bigger level theaters. Certainly the Guthrie does both. We do world premieres, but we probably more often do plays that have already had productions in the regions, again, because we only have so many slots for new plays because we're doing the full canon, and we only have, so much money to develop things and workshop them and get them in shape to really be able to make sure they, if a play gets knocked off in the regional market, it's going to have a harder time going to New York. And in our 100 or 700 seat and 1100 seat house, there's a certain pressure there for a play to be successful because they're such big houses. And so there's a little bit more light shining on them. So I would say we definitely do older new plays as well as new plays. Yes, and that's right. That Cult of Love, was it Cult Kerr?
Cold Cur,
Somebody, wrote that, and also in a regional production as well, I believe. But yeah.
Actually, that brings me to something I was going to ask you. The move, the building the new theater. What precipitated the decision to take on a capital fundraising effort like that to build the theater? Were there structural problems with the existing theater? Were there artistic problems that you needed to try to solve? What happened?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes to
Okay.
both, essentially. The initial idea that we were outgrowing our Vineland Place Theater, the original space next to the Walker Arts Center, actually started to bubble up in the late 1980s, early 1990s under Garland Wright's artistic directorship. That's when the first conversations started to happen. I just note that even from maybe the second or third year of our existence, we were founded in 1963. I would say by 1965, we were programming in a second space. And we've almost consistently had a second space, if not a third space, somewhere else in most eras of our history. And at the time, in the 80s, 90s, we were programming in a second space in what is known as the Warehouse District in Minneapolis, essentially all the way across downtown. And I think it just became clear that the theater needed to grow or there would be some withering. It was just at a stage where it needed more outlets. And so by the time that I sort of became aware of all of this and so when Joe Dowling arrived in 1995, he sort of picked this up and he continued on. And by the time I became really aware of it, there were studies about building up on the space that we have. We were essentially street/land locked/museum locked. So we couldn't build out. So it was, could we build up? And building up was not an option because the ground underneath was too soft. And even there were cracks in portions of the foundation/building with the weight that the building already had. So my guess is the theater would have been fine there for many, many years moving forward, but there was no opportunity to really there was certainly we couldn't add anything there. So we looked for a nearby location and that wasn't available. And then we looked to the river where we eventually found our location. And so we were able to bring, when we left, we had two theaters in different locations. Our scene shop was in St. Paul. Our development office was in another location, and our props and costume storage was in another location. And the goal was to try to bring all of this under one roof. We didn't fully succeed because our prop and costume storage is still off site, but all of the rest of those things were able to be brought under one roof. So we've got our scene shop, all the rest of our shops, costume shop here. We've got all of our theaters here. All of our staff works here. And that was one of the great priorities in finding and building a new location.
Was there a period where you were dark because you were between buildings, or did you have a smooth transition from one to the other?
Very smooth. Fun fact, we opened the Guthrie on May 7th, 1963, and we closed that Vineland Place location May 7th in 2006. Both we opened and closed with the production of Hamlet. And we had our first performances in the new building. We opened the new building around June 20th with our celebration stuff. And I think we had our first performances in July. So we really were dark for like 8 weeks, maybe, in total. It was a process. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Either the universe was very kind to you or you had some brilliant planners.
Mm-hmm. There were some really brilliant planners. Yes, it was a long, long process. People moved in shifts, basically, to make sure that things could get done here and other things could get done there.
To piggyback on that and what you're saying, you're talking about you've always had two spaces. What's the reason for that? What's the raison d'etre of the second space?
A lot of it has been to be able to do newer work, to be able to do lesser known voices or rising voices. From the get-go, Tyrone Guthrie would talk about the program, the artistic programming, that the first season had 3 classic plays and then Death of a Salesman, which at the time was 14 years old. And he's like, we need to program the classics and the classics of the future. But then there was also a need to be able to develop and support playwrights and doing the classics of the future. And frankly, at that time, it was actually a 1,400 seat house. And so they needed, another space where they could just do plays that wouldn't necessarily thrive in a 1,400 seat thrust.
Okay. And we have a third space in this building, which is a studio theater upstairs, named after Joe Dowling, called the Dowling Studio, and it's flexible, so it seats around 150 people. And I think in the before times, and Carla can speak to this more, we did a lot more work up there. But post-pandemic, it's been a little hard in the financial picture to get it all the way back online, but we're working on it. And that's part of when I talked about earlier that I think somewhere down the road, we'll have a more formal new play program. The Dowling Studio would very much be a part of that, because that's the space that there's a lot of plays that we would consider, but we just don't want to drown them in a 700 seat room.
I just want to point out the fact that the artistic directors of the Guthrie Theater have been some of the most prominent people, prominent names in theater. Is there a way in which they have left their marks, at least during their tenure, or have they made permanent changes to the image or the taste level or the culture? Or how have they influenced the theater? These are big names, Joe Dowling and Garland Wright. I mean, they're theater. They are theater.
Yeah, I would say, Guthrie established obviously the theater and also the reputation and the idea of acting company classic work. Most of our artistic directors have carried through the classic canon to some degree. The acting company has come and gone with various people. Michael Langham sort of really, under him, we really had a much more formal, robust new play process at the time. So that was in the 70s. He's also the guy who under whom we started doing A Christmas Carol annually. So we started out as a summer festival theater, and it was with Langham in the 70s that our season began to be done into the fall and even into the early winter. So that's where Christmas Carols sort of came into play. Liviu Chule, I think he literally made his mark on the theater at the time because he changed the shape of the stage and shortened it, because he was also a scenic designer and wanted to put more emphasis on the scenic design, I think, than others. But I think he also raised the profile of the theater in another way with bringing in just another set of international artists during his tenure. Garland Wright really restored the idea of the acting company again. I think that was one of his big things. He also, during his tenure, he was the leader when we established our endowment. So there was a big capital campaign both to renovate the theater, thank you, Mr. Chule, and also to establish the endowment. So that was a huge thing. At the time, it was the largest endowment for a regional theater in the country. And then Joe Dowling, besides moving us into this building, he disbanded the acting company, but expanded the season so that we are now year-round. Our seasons run into each other, because basically his thought was, if I run a theater, I don't want the theater dark ever. I don't want to run a dark theater. So, and he would also talk about, because we have 3 theaters in this building, that's a different form of repertory than the theater was able to do in its early stages with one stage. That you can still come here and see 2 plays at a given time. They might not share the acting company, but it's a different kind of repertory. So he definitely made his mark that way. And I think Joe Hodge has really deliberately tried to diversify the programming that we've done to make sure that we're not backed into what had been for many years a white male canon, but that we're really taking many more voices, both the voices of the people who are writing the play and are on stage telling the play, but also the people who are making up the creative teams and are building and are designing the worlds of the play as well. So that's been a big priority for him. So that's how I would sort of, in big strokes, sort of sum up most of the artistic directors.
What amazes me is how we, quote unquote, didn't notice how white dominated theater was before 9 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. I don't know when suddenly somebody woke up. It's like it's just crazy to me. So this should be the norm. We should just take it in our stride. But there still are a lot of fights going on in regional theaters and everywhere in our culture about the importance of diversity and representation. So let me ask Owen, any other questions in the room that I've missed?
I think there's
was
some
one
on
from
the chat.
Yeah, well, that's his job is to pull them out of the chat and ask them. So, Owen, are you there?
He said he had to leave early.
Oh no, he's not there. All
And
right.
so he put them in the chat.
Oh, good
And I think
Lord.
Bob's been asking about Sally and Tom.
Yeah,
but I think my first day of work here was the last week of Sally and Tom. So Carla can speak more about how Sally and Tom happened.
Yeah, it really landed in our laps because Susan Laurie Park's agent sent it to Joe Hodge. Joe Hodge has a relationship with Oscar Eustis at the Public, and I think I don't know that the relationship had so much to do with it as feeling like the Guthrie was a sort of place that could give the play a similar developmental treatment that Susan Laurie Parks was used to at the Public. And so we read the play, and Joe started a dialogue with Oscar, and we had 2 workshops of it. I'm not going to be able to say exactly when post-COVID in New York, maybe about 9 months to a year apart, something like that. And then we did our production here, which was then the fall of 22. Is that when you started, Tracy?
Yeah, yeah.
And we did that production not really as a not as a co-pro as we might fully understand it. It wasn't just going to move to the public, but we did it fully understanding that the director and the design team were going to be the same. So we hired the designers with the intention and with their advanced knowledge that whatever design they came up with would need to fit our proscenium, and whatever stage, the design, not necessarily the actual set, would have to work for both our proscenium and whatever stage they put it on at the public theater. I think the goal was that the show would be at the public within the same season as we did it, 22-23, but the public ended up, I think, doing it in their 23-24 season instead. We also wanted half the cast to be from Minneapolis and half the cast for our production, half the cast here, half the cast from there. And we were delighted that 3 of our Minneapolis actors ended up actually in the public run as well. So I think it was a really fruitful collaboration between the organizations. I think SLP and Steve Broadnax felt supported here as well. And it was.
I do want to underline the point that that theater is all about relationships. People know each other. That's how things happen in theater. I don't want to simplify it too much, but basically you said it when you said that Oscar Eustis and Paul Haj were in conversation. Yeah. So that's the mystery solved for all of you out there. It's like relationship, meet people, network, get to know people in the business. I realize now that you, Tracy, you came on board just post shutdown. So what was it like adjusting to this new theater that had to reopen after, well, I don't know if it reopened, but I mean, basically it was affected by was affected by shutdown. So I'm sure that was the Guthrie doing virtual stuff to keep the audience engaged? Do you know?
We had we actually did our Christmas Carol as a film stage reading of the play, a stage. We called it Dickens Holiday Classic, so it wasn't our production, but it was a version of A Christmas Carol. And then we worked with a group called the Minnesota Black Theater Artists in town to release monthly projects that they were working on and that we were able to provide a platform for. And those were all virtual projects. And then we had a couple of other collaborations that were virtual as well.
How much was damage control involved in returning to what hopefully is by now some sense of normalcy? I know in New York, normalcy was a very long time coming.
I think there was like a deceptive normalcy, and of course financially, I think this was true across the board, regional and New York. There was a thing where right when we returned, people were very generous, knowing what we'd all been through and that we'd been shut down, both patrons and all the the COVID money that came into non-for-profits made it feel like we were in better shape than we actually were. And, we all debate about, and I would say our audiences aren't back to where they are even still. They're getting there and they're increasing every year, which is the good sign that we're holding on to. But, not just fear of getting COVID and people being afraid of being in crowded spaces, but also what we've all talked about, that people got used to, and TV got better and people got used to watching TV and less used to going out and making plans and all that. So we're still coming back from that. And I mean, it's public knowledge. The Guthrie in, I guess, 22-23 lost almost $3 million. And it was the first time that we'd had a deficit of that large number. And so a lot of the reconnoitering we did to get to 23-24 has been about trying to make a slightly smaller organization that we could build back from. I think perhaps that sort of false feeling of safety that came with the COVID money and came with the donations made us kind of reach too far too fast in terms of going right back to 10 plays and right back to the budgets that we had. And so we shrunk a little bit. So this season we're doing 8 plays instead of 10. And next season we'll hopefully do 9 plays, and then we'll build our way back again. But I don't think anybody's out of the woods. And it still remains to be seen whether we can really get the ticket numbers consistently to where they were before the pandemic.
I had a Beowulf Borit on as a guest about 3 or 4 weeks ago. He talked about one of the very blunt facts. Building materials for his sets increased in cost 80% from pre to post COVID. 80%.
Yeah, I mean, and then things like 250 employees, insurance, utilities. I mean, all these things. The pie chart of our budget, the amount that is fixed costs if we never put on a play, is a big honking chunk of it because of running this building. And I mean, it's an interesting question for all the regional theaters, and I think a lot of the regional theaters, or if you look at a place like Signature in New York, the challenges they're having, buildings are challenging. And sometimes they're great and sometimes they're albatrosses. So
well, second stage basically is now renting it at the Pershing
Signature
Center,
which helps them because Signature has that giant building that they weren't able to pay for. So, yeah.
Oh boy. But wait, there's some other things that are being asked. What are this is a Kate Danley, I believe, was asking this. This is more of a generic question. What are some of the trends you were seeing in theater now, and which direction do you see theater going in the next few years? Any thoughts on that? It's kind of a post-COVID. One of the post-COVID questions is: do people want to see things about COVID, or they want to run away and have escapist stuff?
Well, I think our enemy is no longer COVID as of last week, right?
Right, it's no longer, yeah.
We have a new enemy.
Yeah.
My initial reaction is I think more theaters are looking for opportunities to co-pro than before. That that it feels like theaters are really open to seeing how relationships can work that way. Not that they didn't exist before, but they feel like more theaters are like, yeah, we can get 2 or 3 others on board with this.
Yeah. I mean, I basically spend a chunk of my year talking to all the artistic directors around the country saying, what are you thinking of for next season? Is there anything we can work on together? I also think there's a big trend. I mean, the last 2 years, we've had one of our offerings a year been something that's a book-in from Octopus, from Mara Isaac's company.
Oh.
We've done the Patrick Page one-man show, All the Devils Are Here, and we've done Bill Irwin's one-man show on Beckett. And often it's really a luxury to give relief to the staff to have one play come into a big season that they don't have to make from scratch. And if it's of high quality enough, and we all know there's a lot of very commercial things that are touring around in that way, but companies like Octopus are making more kind of complicated and interesting art that is more in fitting with our mission than I'm trying to think of like the late night catechism.
One of the questions is about Ralph Rapson, the original designer of the Guthrie. Any of his original work still there? How would it be? I mean, you've changed location and changed buildings. Is there still any inspiration from Ralph Rapson?
Yeah, it's more the inspiration than anything that's actually from him. The exterior of the building is entirely different, but the auditorium that he designed at Vineland Place is the inspiration for the auditorium here. There were some necessary building code things that needed to change from 63 to 2003. But the shape, the choices, even that he chose multicolored seats for the auditorium, those are all in homage to his original design for the auditorium.
And he's also the designer of the theater that the History Theater's in St. Paul now as well. So there is a Ralph Rapson theater working as a theater in town as well.
Let's see, what do I have here? Oh, Eric Rothman, of course, is asking this. Do you ever get involved in immersive and site-specific theater, filming of productions, interaction with AI or other experimental theater? And anything on that menu that you're going to order?
I mean, I love immersive theater. We have not done it here at the Guthrie. I've done some of it personally, but I'm trying to think about anything else. AI, we haven't really completely merged with. We use it as a tool. Anything else out of that?
I think the AI is actually inevitable for all of us. I mean, it's just it's a tool that's available. It can be used creatively. Do you know Tim Kashani, Apples and Orange Productions in LA? He's got a whole deal where he's working on about 8 immersive AI productions. He spoke with us. I think that it's inevitable. A lot of us are resistant to it. A lot of us are very critical of AI and wary of it. But I think that it is a tool for the toolbox that will be useful and will be used.
Yeah.
Do you have some patron donors or rely on lots of small content? I'm sure you have patron donors. You have major donors.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have what we call producers per show. So they're major donors who have chosen to sort of give a large gift in support of given shows.
Judith, some companies are joining to do collectives. Each company has their own production, but the company, well, that's kind of what you're talking about. But other companies share a space and crews and other, that's not what you're talking about. Okay, and they share a space and crews and other such expenses. Just so one of 3 members of a collective. Theater rental was $21,000 for the month, so each company's expense was $7,000. You're not in a situation where you need to work as a collective. You guys are pretty independent and have a pretty solid reputation, and I'm sure that you have some pretty steady major donors that keep you alive.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very robust development department as well as a large board of directors. Board of directors are all pretty significant donors, and we still do. Corporate donation is dwindling quickly in every market, including ours. But we do have some pretty significant Fortune 500 companies in town that are still very generous to us, or at least I think some of the corporate money now is moving toward. We used to just think of it as, the company would give you money because it's a good thing to do, and the philanthropy looks good on them. But now I think corporations are more angling toward using their marketing dollars. So they'll be a sponsor of a gala or a sponsor of a show because then their name is all over everything. But we're kind of told that a lot of the corporate dollars are, if there's a company that makes food, they're going to give money to starving children before they're going to give to theater because it makes sense, food and, so they're a little bit more aligned to things that are their actual product. So corporate dollars are becoming harder and harder. Foundation dollars are becoming a little more difficult as, those monies sort of dwindle and people aren't as eager to set up those big family foundations as we used to have. Certainly I know here and as well as in Pittsburgh, half of the arts were funded by large family foundations that had been there for a couple generations. And I don't think that's as much of a trend that families are setting up those family foundations in the same way. So we're relying more and more on the just straight up individual annual fund donation and the sort of more significant donors that we've cultivated over many years and continue to cultivate to make sure they are really connected with the organization in order to make sure they give us their time and treasure in equal parts.
Well, I think we're at 6:47, so you've been here much longer than I thought you would be. So thank you so much, Tracy and Carla. I enjoyed this very much. I always enjoy hearing about theater outside of New York. It's become a thing for me. I just have to be reminded over and over again that it's not just Broadway. And you've shared a lot of information and a lot of interesting insights, I think, for me and for the room, I assume as well. I'm going to uh, invite you to stay if you can for a little bit longer, but I'm going to give me a moment. I'm going to go into I'm gonna go into um, speaker view, or I'm gonna be spotlighting myself for a second, and I'm gonna say goodbye to my other audiences. This is to, well, first of all, to my audience in the room. Very nice attendance today. Oh, Paul Smith, I am sorry I didn't see your hand raised, but we will get to your question as soon as I finish saying goodbye to my YouTube audience. So thank you, Carla. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for all of my attendees and all the members of the TRU community. It's astonishing that I have so much company every Friday at 5 o'clock now for what is it, 246 consecutive weeks. Um, Amazing, just amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Those of you out there, if you enjoyed what you heard, and if you're interested in conversations about theater, never know who I'm going to bring on and what we're going to be talking about. But next week we're going to be having two writers of off-Broadway musicals who are going to talk about their careers and some of their successes and how to cobble together a career as a writer in New York. Not an easy thing to do, but they both have had success. It's Michael Roberts and Michael Colby. So I will be getting confused next Friday talking to one Michael and another. So join us for that. The week after that, I'm planning on having a Valentine's Day program with producers who are married couples. How did they do it? How did they survive it? And then we have Donald France who's coming. He's a producer. He used to be with Disney. And then the week after that, I'm being visited from Minnesota again. On the 28th, we have somebody coming from the Minnesota Playwrights Unit. We talk about everything and anything. So if you like it and you want to be part of the room, you can email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. We'll put you on the Zoom list and we'll invite you week after week. We started this as a community service and it was free, and I wouldn't have thought of it as being anything other than that. Although we always had an optional donation, and as Tracy and Carla were saying earlier, early in at the beginning of shutdown, people were very generous. So most people were actually not coming for free. They were giving us donations to keep us going. That's kind of drifted off a little bit. So if you'd like to keep us going and if you like what we do and you want to support us, go to trudonate.com, TRU donate.com, and give us a little support. We'd appreciate it. And I hope to see you in the coming weeks. Thank you for being with us.